Members of the board, I would like to really give you a precursor of what we're going to be talking about on the 26th. Because what you have here is the agenda of all the things that we are covering when we go to the different area meetings. Obviously, I won't go through every last one of these different sections, but at every last one of the meetings, if you go to the next slide, we take them through an introduction. What has been extremely valuable is that board members have been there. Mr. Giaquina and Julie have opened up meetings, but other board members have been in the audience, and that's extremely important for us. But we always introduce, and I want to do the same thing tonight, Mr. Charles Kamak, who is in charge of operations. We have Mr. Frank Jackson, who is our Director of Transportation, and Javon Barnes, who is really the contact liaison worker bee for our Parent and Student Services Department. We open up with what are expectations, because one of the lessons learned is no matter what kind of process you put together, if you have 30,000 parents, the only child they're concerned about is their one. So one of the things we try to do at the beginning is to set expectations of why we're there, and this slide basically kind of covers us doing some background information. This was from the Wayne feeder area. It talks specifically about what's in store for parents for that feeder area, timeline, give them, at every one of our meetings we have out in the entryway, large posters that are visuals of the boundaries and what we're actually planning to do. And I think the most valuable part of every one of these presentations is that question and answer period. Because one of the things we want parents to get when they come to these meetings is you're not voting until we've had that opportunity to do some interaction with community members to get some things maybe we didn't think about. We begin always with the current reality, and we've traded off at the last, we've had 3 of these sessions. Board members have helped by covering some of the why are we where we are. And if you get on Facebook, and if you listen to, get on Twitter, or if you listen to people who talk about what our current situation is around transportation, it's kind of amazing that part of our message is not getting through. That people actually think that we chose to be in this situation. But what we try to do with the next couple of slides is explain the impact of the circuit breaker. So what we do is take audience members through a Reader's Digest version of the circuit breaker, and normally when this is being discussed, we make sure that people connect that concept of tax caps and circuit breaker. And so this can be a long explanation, or in some of the audience there hasn't been a lot of questions about it. But I think the most important part about this is that this is not new. This started in 2008. This is a constitutional amendment. This does limit the amount of money that we are able to collect as a result of whatever is collected in taxes is capped. And we try to make sure that people understand, if you go to the next slide, that bottom line, we have been unable to collect around $9 million. We expect for that number to double by 2017. If you're not collecting as much money or able to collect as much because of the caps, it ultimately results in fewer services.
But only if costs go up, right? I mean, if costs had stayed the same over 5 years, you could continue to provide the same service at the same price.
Well, costs such as gas, such as salaries of employees, such as health care, all of those. But another thing, and this is something that we own every time we have this conversation, as our population has become more diverse, as we have offered more programs, as we started full-day kindergarten. We have more ELL students that we have been moving to different locations trying to service the needs of parents. So cost is one thing, but our commitment as a board and as an administration to provide services for our parents, that's also expanded what we've done.
But I'm just saying that even if you hadn't, if you expand the service, if you don't expand service at all, but costs go up over 5 years,
right,
and your revenue is capped, it's the same thing as saying, my first year as a lawyer, my salary was $12,000. I got a $2,000 bonus, so I made 14. But if I had tried to stay on 14,000, I might have made it through year one, and I might have changed a few things in year two. But sooner or later, as my expenses go up, my ability to live the same lifestyle that I was living at $14,000 isn't going to work by year 5 and 6. It just isn't going to work.
Right.
Because costs have gone up. I've got to change my lifestyle if I'm capped at 14,000.
And our lifestyle was to provide service. And our lifestyle was to support. And this is something we also talk about. We've been a choice district before the concept of choice became popular at the state level. But you're absolutely correct. If you cap how much I have and costs go up, that's one of the first issues. So, bottom line, we're trying to get parents and community people to see that for us, that capping requires us to cut about $2.5 million from our current spending, because we're not going to have that money to spend. And it's not just a one-time, it's yearly. So every year we have to cut, this year, the 2.5, and maintain that cut. So if you look at the next slide, this is just basically, this is one of the newer ones we added after the first couple of meetings to show that we're not the only ones in the county who are impacted by the circuit breaker. If you look at the libraries up there, the county, the city, but the disadvantage we have is that the city can raise taxes to replace some of the money that they're not able to get because of the cap.
Income taxes.
Income taxes, other kinds of taxes. We can't. So part of it is when you look at this whole concept of circuit breaker, because others have said, well, you're not the only ones. Well, no, we're not. But we are schools are not able to raise taxes without going to the taxpayer. For example, some districts get referendums to get additional funding, but this is our reality.
Dr. Robinson, the board received a letter asking us, and so I'm going to take this opportunity to ask you, why can't you just get the city to give you the income tax revenue they raise to apply to our transportation shortfall?
Or apply, or have an additional 1% sales tax or something.
That's an interesting idea, and I bet City County would be more than happy to have me come and demand that they do that for us. But the other part becomes, the other school systems also are a part of, and parts of them are in the city. And so it seems really simplistic until you start thinking. The city's struggling to make sure they have enough money to do the things they're going to do. And while they really care about us, not to that level. So I have no control over that. I don't think you do either. You're not the board for the city. But those are the kind of ideas that people are coming up with. Now, this is a new slide because I've been, as we've stood there and talked to parents, everybody is, you're just dropping this on us. Why didn't you talk about this? Why didn't we know? So this is just a little bit of a chronology. And the one thing we do know, it really isn't real until it impacts you. So we don't say this in a nah kind of way, but we have been at every single budget presentation, at the presentation at Southside, as we've gone down to lobby, We talked to parents. Kathy Green sitting here. We talked to parents ad nauseum before the circuit breaker even was adopted, because that statement, 5 years after we do this, we're going to look back and actually have consequences on what we've decided to do. So not to really belabor that point, but it didn't come out of nowhere. When we could, we tried to impact that constitutional passing of
You
the...
both were, we were at Southside in the auditorium. Kathy spoke, you spoke, I talked to Representative Espick afterwards, and we addressed this issue. We've addressed it every year since, and it just amazes me. But until you see the impact, people don't really, they just don't believe it.
I had a conversation with my son who engaged in trying to give a civics lesson to some friends of his who have kids over Facebook. And I made him promise not to do that, because one of the things that we have to understand in an urban environment with as many students and parents that we have, people are busy leading their lives. And one of the things we've done as a district is really make it look easy by always finding solutions. This is one that, if you go to the next slide, we don't have a solution. And part of it is they look at what we have done with our salaries for our employees and any other thing, my salary, anything, and they'll just say, if you didn't do that, then you would be able to. So we take them through this bucket conversation. And what we try to explain to them is the property tax bucket. There are different pieces to it, but they all have a very specific purpose.
That all of those property tax funds were one, but they are not.
And we try to talk through
Transportation,
that.
different bucket. Capital projects, different bucket. Debt, different bucket, right.
Now, there's another thing that we talk about, too, because what the state is talking about is just making it all one big bucket and just dumping all of these things, and then you just, board members, you vote how you want to use the money. Sounds good, but also along with that plan is reduce the amount in each of the little bit of buckets, the different buckets. When you put them all together, you have less money to work with. So one of the things that we have to do as a public institution that others don't is we are responsible to taxpayers to tell you what we use each one of those buckets for. And every time you approve a budget, and every time you have those small group meetings, we take you through that. So I am not in favor of having this one big bucket that we're trying to do more with less, okay? Because one of the things that's happened is when you know what's in the transportation bucket, you're not robbing from Peter to pay Paul. You put a plan together for what you have, just like you do with your budgets at home. And so we like the way this is. We just don't like having an artificial cap that forces you. I said to people at Wayne, well, we're standing here explaining this, but I didn't vote for the property tax caps and tried to get them not to happen. But this is our reality now. And so I think that's one of the messages we've got to keep saying to people. This is the reality, it's Constitution. And if you look at the next slide, we're not the only ones. What I appreciate is that we have a structure in this district and an expectation. We're always talking to our community. We have public sessions. We didn't say in April, I didn't come to you and say in April, guess what I want you to do and vote on for August. We're giving people about 8 months. Now, that also gives people lots of time to pick holes at every single thing you do, but you kind of want that to happen. We want people to be a part of this because here's what's got to happen. Parents are going to have to live with whatever you vote on the 26th. And we're going to have to be partners with parents, and we're already starting to try to help think of, we had a meeting with PTA at the Snyder meeting. What are things we can do as a district? What are things PTA can do? We're trying to talk to people in the city. We're trying to, the fact that the snow couldn't have happened at a worse time because it brings up all the worst nightmares of last year and, streets not being plowed. So part of the message has to be, we're starting in enough time to think of all the what-ifs. And even with that, we're still going to miss one because there's so many different moving parts. But we're not the only ones going through this. So what are we doing? What is the plan? Well, the first is this concept of, these are some of the proposed solutions, that other funding options, we have already covered that. Several parents at every single meeting Parents will say, well, just let me pay. Well, that's not allowed. Parents want to do that in Franklin Township, Muncie. There are currently 2 cases at the state Supreme Court. One was about the total eliminating transportation and whether that's an option you can immediately do, and the other is around paying, right, Bill? So both of those are at state Supreme Court level, but right now that's not lawful. The other reason that we as a district are not promoting this pay is we're right back into the concept of the haves and have-nots. So if parents have means, their parents can pay for them to ride the bus, those who don't. So that's just not something that we see as a viable option, even if it wasn't a law, but it is a law. So the meat of what we're looking at are the next 3. Next slide, no transportation. This is a policy that is already in place, and what we have been doing over the last several years is we adhere to the policy, but when there were certain special circumstances, or we started a new program, or we provided more choice, we have made exceptions to the policy. And so now we have a process that most of you are aware of. It's called an inter-district transfer. And not only for magnet programs, but you can go to another school not in your boundary, in your home district, if you and your parent, the parent chooses that different school for their child. So now what we have is extremely blurred boundaries. The no transportation zone, for all intents and purposes, doesn't really exist. So our first bucket of savings is around that. So if you look at the next, this is an example of what that looks like. And these are examples of the big posters we have out in the foyer. If you look at the red circle, the school is in the middle of that circle. And this is an elementary example, so it's a mile to the edges of the circle. The green blob, that is green, that's the school boundary. So the concept is, if you are within the red circle, even the ones who are in the green inside of the red circle, that's a no transportation zone. If you are in the green outside of the circle, and that's the boundary for that school, that's the transportation zone. Have I gotten that right, Mr. Jackson?
Yes, you are correct.
Yes, you may.
This is the mile radius here. This is the no transportation zone. And we developed a no transportation zone to take in consideration busy thoroughfares and so forth. So the no transportation zone doesn't actually reach all the way out, as you can see here, because we have to take busy streets, additions, those sort of things into consideration. So this is your no transportation zone in here.
And that is a concept that, and we'll talk about that when we send the letters, we're going to send these maps. But the first part is we're trying to get the concept of no transportation and that boundary. Okay? Now let's go to the next slide and we'll cover some of the things that we will still do even though we have that boundary. We will continue to transport for magnet schools and schools, the programs to study at high school, but it's the same thing. If you're outside of that no transportation zone, if you're inside of the no transportation zone, even if you're going to a magnet school or a program of study, you will receive no transportation. We are going to allow people to still go to schools that are not in their attendance area, but we will no longer provide, that's the IDT or the inter-district transfer, but we will no longer provide transportation. And that's a big deal for a lot of parents because they were making choices. We could have a child who's over by Northrop who's going to Wayne because that's what they chose to do, and we were providing transportation. Well, that's a part of, you can still do that, but we won't be providing that transportation. And what Mr. Jackson just demonstrated is we're going to make some common sense decisions. If you go back to that slide of that elementary, there may be major highways, 4-laners. There may be other kinds of situations. One of the things that most parents have really been concerned about are the additions where there are no sidewalks. So there are some of those kinds of safety issues. Mr. Jackson has gone through with his staff every single neighborhood in the district and highlighted where there are situations that are not conducive to students being able to walk.
Would it be possible for Mr. Jackson to come back up to the screen and maybe just give us an example or two?
He has to get a mic first.
Yeah.
Mr. Jackson, would you get the mic?
And maybe, and you don't have to give us all of the examples, but show us where we see the no transportation zone and we see the 1 mile radius. Could you give us an example of a characteristic between the two lines that caused you to draw the no transportation zone where you did?
Sure. Covington Road, for example, here. If you come up here, Illinois Road, we all know how busy Illinois Road is. So those are a couple of examples there that we tried to indicate there. So those are the kind of examples that we have in place.
Okay.
Another example to that, Mr. Jackson has been working with this, and Mr. Kamak and I and Mr. Jackson are going to attempt. The Wayne area is going to have some challenges from the standpoint CityLink won't go there. They don't extend their services out there. So one of the things that, as a part of this study, is Mr. Jackson submitted, here are ways that really transportation or lack of transportation will really become an issue. So let me restate what I just said. You have to have rules and processes to make a decision, but we're not going to just be so hard and fast when we know that Illinois Road is a place that all parents would have a concern trying to get kindergarten students across Illinois Road. So what we will be sending to parents is a letter telling them whether they have transportation or no transportation, if that's what you vote for us to do, plus this kind of detail. When we're done with all of the, and you've adopted, all of this will be on the web, so parents can be able to have this kind of a visual to see what we're talking about and why we made some decisions.
Dr. Robinson, when I mentioned to you earlier today, when I went to Bishop Luers, we didn't have transportation. Everybody, I mean, we just didn't have bus service, but we had carpools. And then by the time you were a junior, you had your driver's license, so you would pick up your friends, and 3 or 4 of us would drive to school together. And you know, and there were times where I was about 2 miles out, but there were kids from New Haven and Yoder and all over the place, and I mean, I don't know how everybody did it, but everybody just sort of carpooled. Will there be an effort by PTAs to assist in the formation? Since, I mean, to some degree, I hate to put it this way, but we've kind of been our own worst enemy because we tried so hard to provide service that perhaps parents have just gotten out of the habit of figuring out transportation because they haven't had to. But now that they do, will there be, and Kathy was nodding her head yes, there'll be efforts to
We've had that
assist
conversation.
in the formation of carpooling and that kind of thing, because, I mean, that's,
Right.
we did it and it just happened. But.
Right. We've got another serious issue that we're going to have to figure out before you vote, too. Right now, we have at least 100 daycare centers where parents send their children to that daycare so that they can get a bus to a specific school. Now, for some daycares, a woman at one of our meetings was explaining she had 60 kids that goes to one and 40 that go to another. Well, we're not going to have 6 buses pulling up to a daycare center. What we still have to do is work with those daycare centers within these boundaries. We're trying to work with them that, okay, maybe the kids who are at your center, if they are all outside of the no transportation zone, but their home address is the boundary, within the boundaries for the school. That's going to be another issue we have, because that daycare center could have kids from 10 different boundaries or boundary areas, and so any decision we're going to make is based on what your home address is. So we're going to work with daycare centers. We have now probably 12 or 13 before and after Y-care centers. So we're trying to work with them to see if they could add more of those so that kids at specific schools. This is going to be a long process with that, helping give parents options. But I have to keep saying, the reason we started as soon as we did is parents are going to have to help us by coming up with options also. Okay? And I want to put this out there. Well, I'll get to that when I get to the bell schedule. So, on the next slide, if you keep going, Jack. We transport about 21,000 students. The estimate right now is between 4,000 to 6,000 may be impacted. We're getting closer and closer to actually honing in on how many that is. We're having a conversation today, and so I want to recognize Jack and the technology department and the Versatrans, which is our system in transportation. We have a pretty accurate system. Now, here's what causes us heartburn. People don't give us accurate addresses because people want the address to match where they want to go to school. And so that's really like the boots on the ground work we've got to do now to make sure the addresses are correct. Because if we don't have correct addresses, then we don't have a really accurate system. So we're working on that. The second thing we've done is minor. And in our meetings, we haven't had a lot of pushback in particular on this first one, because it's almost a common sense adjustment. We have a Mariners Ridge, Pheasant Run neighborhood. You basically had a current feeder pattern. We're trying to make sure it's an elementary, middle, high school. All the kids are going together. So it's now Maplewood, Miami, Wayne. We have a Waynedale section that was split. We're now looking at Waynedale going to Portage or Miami. We can't really get that one clean because we really need another middle school. We closed Geyer, which was making it all nice and neat. We had the same number to feed into high schools. Well, that's not going to happen. So there we had to split, but all the kids end up at Wayne. If you look at the next page, we have the same kind of situation with Price and Holland. We used to have a 65-35 split for Price and Holland. What we're now trying to do is to get all the kids going to the same school together. So Price is a Price, Northwood, Northside, or Northrop. That's a huge area in the northern end of the city. So that depends on how close they are to those. Holland will be Holland, Jefferson, Northrop. This would be an issue because there's some students who can see Northwood outside their back door. But there's a large percentage of the students at Holland that are already going to Jefferson because they're on the other side of North Clinton. So what we intend to do with those 4 schools is hold individual meetings at those schools with those parents. And what we're also doing is letting those students who want to stay there at the school where they are fill out an IDT. All right, so we're going to give those students who are currently there a preference, but here's the kicker. If you're not going and to the school where we're assigning you, there's no transportation. So if you're in the no transportation zone, even if you choose to stay there, you can do that, but we are not providing that transportation. The only group of students that we are giving that option to have to stay where they are 11th graders going into senior high school. Because there's just so many different things you could do to mess up a senior's life if you try to make some of those adjustments. So Faye has already worked out a process. We're going to have guidance counselors talk specifically to every single junior so that we don't miss a student and absolutely make sure that they're in the right place.
I know you told me this before, but will the Holland families who can see Northwood but have to go to Jefferson, will they be in or out of the transportation zone?
If they go to Jefferson, 99% are, they'll have transportation. They'll have transportation to Jefferson, but not if they go to Northwood. Most of the, well, the ones that can see Northwood, right, Javon? Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they could get an inter-district. Could they be an inter-district?
To stay at Northwood?
To stay at Northwood?
If there's space.
Yeah. But then they would have to walk. Because
Correct.
they can see it out their
Correct.
back door.
Correct. But the other thing that we took into consideration is we had a demographer work with us, and we took into consideration capacity. And that's why the Holland Price split, because Jefferson has capacity, Northwood does not. And so the numbers work out better. And that's why those suggestions were made. Okay, so the one that has caused the most activity is this concept of the 3-tier schedule. And we have had conversations around for years since I've been superintendent, this concept of high school students starting later, based on research. But we never really did much about it because of not wanting to upset the apple cart. What do you do with the other 2 levels? Well, it's back on the table now because we have a couple of issues. One is the budget. The other is every district, even private people are finding, private companies are having trouble finding drivers. And so part of our problems in terms of transporting students and making sure that we did it in a timely manner was the pool of drivers keeps shrinking. So this is presented, and it's a tight, I was reminded by Mr. Jackson to say, while there are 3 distinct time schedules, they're tight because we're trying to reduce the amount of time we have drivers idle. So we have about the same number of middle school and high school students. We are now transporting them together. When we split them, that gives us some flexibilities with how we can use drivers. But one of the biggest impacts for elementary school, it will, if this all works out perfectly, which every day it won't, we will reduce the amount of times that elementary students get to school late or get home late because they're impacted by what we're doing if there's a problem with middle and high school routes. So this tiered schedule, the only thing that we will have up and running and absolutely live in August is the implementation of the hours and the routes. But what we're going to do is we've had conversations with FWA. We are going to put together study groups, study committees of administrators, teachers for each one of these levels, because the art of the possible of what you could do at high school with some more flexible scheduling. Kids don't all have to come at the same time at high school. There are lots of things that we could do, we think, that would provide better opportunities. So we're going to put these groups together to start working now, but over the next 2 years come up with real solid plans that every year we'll implement pieces of. And we've talked to the PTA about, as the committees work, maybe every 3 months, we'll have a parent review group. And we'll bring parents in and say, okay, here's some things we're thinking about. So that by the time we're done with this study group, we've had teachers involved, we've had parents involved. I have a student advisory group. I meet with students from each of the high schools, including the Anthus Career Center, and I think we meet on Wednesday. So what we're trying to do is, the necessity and the urgency is to get the schedule in place so we can start the savings. But what you can do innovatively and what kind of different things can occur at each one of those levels, we're going to take our time so that we don't rush and mess up something that's working now, but also provide some opportunities for some input about, well, if we're changing anyway, what could we add that would be a better service for students? So,
Dr. Robinson, you know, something occurred to me. I've read some comments about, you know, I have to be at my job such and such, and so I can't drop my high school student off at 9 o'clock, but that doesn't mean the building's gonna open at 9 or 5. I mean, most high schools probably open an hour before, and I don't know, and that may be something that high schools might consider.
Well, one of the things we're going to have to...
There might be parts of the building that are open, so that students can be dropped off like at 8 o'clock.
Here's a risk we run. With these hours, I'm also going to have teachers setting different hours. And so one of the things you have to have is coverage when you open your building.
Right, right.
So
I know there'll be teachers there at 8 o'clock.
Right, but
you know there will.
Yeah, but their assignment will be to be working on the assignment for the next, for that day. Well, I think we've got to be very careful as we go forward. We're in this situation because we've gone over and above to be very customer focused. I don't want parents thinking that we're going to change this time, but you can just drop the kids off anyway. Because then what we have, you know as well as I do, some of the kids may have a need to be there. Others, oh, you're going to be at school at 8 o'clock? Okay, I'll come early too. And then the next thing we know, at Northrop, we got 900 kids who are there at 8 o'clock with the 2 teachers who came early to get their work done. So part of what I'm not trying to say, we're not going to try to think of, like at elementary and middle in particular, before and after school care. But either we're going to have these schedules or we're not.
But how, I think what Julie's saying, when, now, for example, how early can a parent drop a child off now before the bell sounds?
And I'm just saying it's something that each school could discuss.
And I'm saying that as a part of these committees, those are things that those committees that by level can have those as conversations.
Right.
But I think we're both understanding each other. We're going to have to be flexible on some level to help. But by the other token, then we're not going to be able to, I'll be coming to tell you that now I've added staff, which is a general fund issue, because I don't have coverage. And the first time something happens where there was a lack of supervision, then it's on us. So yes, it's a reasonable request to look at it, which I got that part. But I just want us to be cautious that one woman said to me that we are not teaching kids real life skills because these are not the hours that people go to work. And I said, you're absolutely right. Some are going to work at midnight, some are going to work at 4, some are going to work at 2. And one of the things we really have to look at high school, Faye's already started, looking at some of this. What kind of opportunities, even before 9 o'clock, can we provide kids in the community? Internships, all kind of things that could be a part of enriching that environment. But we know.
People, you don't get off at 3 o'clock either. I mean, if you took that argument the other way, we'd keep them till 5. So
around here it'd be about 9. But so what are the next steps? Obviously, you will be asked to vote on this on the 26th. We have the process for as soon as that occurs. We're going to be sending the letters specifically. Kathy will not let us say anything about how much we saved until she can see it in print. And part of it, you won't know the exact savings until the routes are developed. We are working on making absolutely certain, even at parent-teacher conferences, which is 28th and 29th, that we're mailing out letters, then we're going to have a backup plan to give letters to people you haven't thought through all of it, to have a backup plan for making sure that people get that information. And then those are just a few of the things that I talked about. It's just amazing the complexity of what we do with transportation and the kind of services that we provided. So all of that we've got to get cleaned up. We are asking parents, get involved, investigate other options. We have these Tuesday tours. I'm telling parents, please don't listen to somebody else tell you about what's happening at a school. You have an opportunity to go in and visit. Make sure that you're making an informed decision. We've extended the deadline for applications to February 6th. We're going to keep the lottery on the 27th because we think we've been talking about this enough that unless people just haven't paid any attention at all, most are aware of this, but we're even going to double and triple check and make sure that every parent is aware. Working with the PTAs, we're going to put all the boundaries on the web, and we've been telling parents, if you don't have a letter in your hand by the 1st of February, you call somebody, because maybe it didn't get to you for lots of different reasons, but we're going to be double and triple checking who we haven't heard from. We're explaining to our parents and constituents that legislators need to hear from them because it's constitutional. That'll take a long process to overturn that, but the state did work on giving us a portion of some flexibility, which is why we didn't do this last year, and what was it, like 600,000? But 600,000 won't fix this. So we need a sustainable solution, and we're pointing people to our website to get the information. And then we just summarize, what did you hear? What did you hear? So all of these are the talking points that summarize what we have done. We get to the end and I describe the hotline, but just tell people don't call until after you get a letter. But we know that we're going to have to dedicate resources to working one-on-one with parents after they get those letters.